from the top again.
Okay.
And so I was just explaining to everybody how important it is for members of our community, especially folks from the early generation of writers, join us to tell us their story live and direct, straight from you, firsthand accounts, so that we can get the information and the history that you've seen and witnessed and experienced, you know, that we're not going to get anywhere else. You know, these things are not in books yet. And so we are very appreciative of your time to, you know, coming on with us tonight. And so we're going to just share a little bit with the audience, a little bit about you so that they know who you are, and you'll break it down further. So James Topp grew up as a warrior in East New York, Brooklyn. Fighting for survival in the project was not a choice, it was reality. With a can of spray paint, he created a new identity for himself, G2. Over and over again, he wrote his name on doors, walls, trains in defiance and with pride. That is the start of G2. The Odd Partners was his crew, and its members became his brothers. He renamed himself James Topp because it expressed his hope and desire to reach the top in his art and in his life. His art is iconic, his life in deep and with meaning. His series Afroology graphically tells a story of the Black man in society, a precursor to the Black Lives Matter movement. So we're going to get into all those things and James' involvement with the Graffiti Hall of Fame. And James, although you were born and sort of in your very early years lived in the Bronx, I feel like your story really starts in Brooklyn.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I remember very little of my family living in the Bronx during, you know, that time. My mother came up from South Carolina, and she lived with her on the Edenwald projects. And yeah, she had met my father. They had one kid, and you know, when I was born, I was the second of 9, you know, kids. And I remember very little of the Bronx during that time. But I would move back to the Bronx again later on in my life. But I'm strictly, you know, growing up, everything I learned in the streets of, you know, Brooklyn, East New York, and Bed-Stuy.
And so, you know, tell us about those early days in East New York. What was East New York like in the 60s, in the early 70s?
Well, you know, growing up, you know, East New York was one of those neighborhoods that was involved with, you know, white flight. East New York was predominantly Jewish and somewhat Italian neighborhood, but they started moving out when Blacks and Puerto Ricans started moving in. It was a beautiful neighborhood at first, but eventually it started to deteriorate, and it deteriorated to the point whereas, you know, a lot of people talk about the South Bronx, but East New York was way bigger than the South Bronx and way more bombed out, if you ask me, than the South Bronx. Pretty dangerous place to live at, but I really didn't feel afraid or anything, you know, at all, because it was my neighborhood, and I knew mostly everybody there, and we would move because I had such a big family. When conditions started getting so bad, we moved from one place to the other place, and all in East New York. I was telling my brother the other day, and I stated in my book, I lived on Cleveland Street twice. We lived on Cleveland Street 3 times. I guess my mother liked it, Cleveland Street. But I lived on Barbie, lived on Atkins Avenue. And then when we moved to the pink houses in about 1970, that was a big step up from us than, you know, to live in old East New York, where most of the blocks were, you know, burnt down, and there was blocks that were just not even there anymore. And, you know, we had to walk those streets. Pretty tough neighborhood. I think people heard stories about the 75th precinct and, you know, how bad it was. But when we moved into pink houses, it was like the Jeffersons. We were moving on up, and it was beautiful there in the beginning as well. But then it started gaining that reputation of being a very bad place to live.
So the idea of these new communities with the projects is what you started to experience, and so the project started out as being a sort of a middle class dream or something, right? And
Yes, yeah, no,
you know,
you're exactly right. I mean,
or maybe not middle class, a working class dream.
well, working class, yeah, but you know, you could say middle class because there were a lot of people that had cars and you know, good jobs and things of that nature. But slowly but surely, you know, bad elements started, you know, taking over, and it is what it is. You know, there was 22 buildings there. There were projects, you know, down the block, the Cypress Hills projects, and across the street from where I lived at, more like a block and a half down, was Linden Plaza, which was a new middle class development. But the thing about Linden Plaza, underneath there was the biggest A yard, which was the picking yard. And that yard, we used to play in that yard before I was a writing, you know, before I started writing. And I guess when I started writing, going in that yard was very comfortable for me because, like I said, we used to play in the yard.
Right. Right. And so what attracted you in those early days to doing that? Like what was it that really got you to say, hey, you know what? The A yard, picking housings, let's go in there.
Um, you know, my desire to express myself. I think at first I was like everybody else. Um, you know, I wanted to be a part of this, like kind of like new movement. And I wanted to learn art, but there was no place in my community I could learn art. So I joined in with my man Cheer Two, and we just started, you know, tagging the streets. And then I figured out there was like notoriety in this, and you know, people started paying my tag attention, started talking to me about it, and I'm talking about as early as like 11 and 12 years old. You know, we were writing in the buildings, we were writing on the streets of East New York, we were fighting against other projects, and we were writing in their buildings and things of that nature. And the evolution at that time was that you became the king of you know, your projects first, you know, then the streets, and then you graduate to the train yards. And that was, you know, a big thing back then, actually representing your neighborhood and then writing on the trains. And my home line was the A line. My home station was Euclid Avenue. Euclid and Pickens Avenue. And, you know, we had to go past another project to get on the train.
So for folks that don't know, can you just tell us a little bit more about Pickin and Pink Houses? How many buildings were there? You know, how many people?
The Pink Houses got 22 buildings.
22 buildings, 8
22
stories tall.
buildings. They like 8 stories high, 7 to 8 stories high. And across the street was a newer development called Linden Plaza. And they were middle class. But like I said, underneath Linden Plaza was the A yard. And that's where they would lay up the trains. On one side, there would be the express trains. And then the other side, which was easier to get in, would be the local trains. At first, it was the E and the F. They would lay up there, especially during the lunch hour. Actually, the A line, the E and F, the E line, excuse me, was the local for the A train for a long time until they switched it up and made it the C line.
Got it. And so you were fortunate enough to live right across the street and with a train yard that had buildings built right on top of it.
Yes. It was a great cover, and you know, we would jump in the yard. There's supposedly this guy by the name of Odd One, and he had a key to, because he lived in Linden Plaza. He had a key and he could open the fence and go right into the yard. But most of the time there were holes in the fences, and we would get in through the holes. The A side of the yard was much more secure, and the transit police used to patrol that yard more. They would never come over to the local side. So I kind of got my start on the local side, during lunch hours. I would skip school a hell of a lot, to go to writer's bench and to go into the yard during the lunch hours when they would lay the trains up during the lunch hours. It'd be packs of us going into the E and the F side too, because the F trains used to be in there too. So at first when I was getting up, it was mostly on the E's and the F trains. And then you had to have a lot of balls to go over to the A side, but eventually we was going over to the A side too.
So what years are we talking about, and how old are you?
I was about 12 years old, almost 13, but not quite. 12 years old, going into the train yards there and meeting other writers and trying to pick up style. I used to love the insides at first. I mean, I simply love the insides, man.
So can you explain for folks that don't know what the insides, what are you talking about when you say the insides? Because
yeah, the insides, I mean the insides of the trains, because you have to remember, to hit the outside of the trains, you need a spray paint. And spray paint was another level. You can always get a marker and buy some ink, or you can even make your own markers with the erasers that we have in school, and we would take those and we would empty out lighters and put the felt tips inside these metal lighters and pour ink, because we used to buy the ink separately, and we used to make our own markers, and we used to go and just strictly hit the insides of the trains, not the outsides, the insides of the trains. And most of the times I used to go alone and just hit the insides of the trains. I made my mark on the insides first before I started hitting the trains, and figured out that the outsides, you get more noticed on the outsides than on the insides, because the insides, people have to come in the trains and you could see your names, but the outsides you could always see going by, you know what I'm saying? So it was the more exposed writers, the big time writers, they were all on the insides. I mean the outsides, not the insides. But I made my mark on the insides first before I started getting up on the outsides. When I first started, it was a guy by the name of Odd1, ADD, and he took over from Spin and Stop 700. So he was kind of like a bridge from the first generation, because I wouldn't call myself a first generation A-line writer. I was more a second generation A-line writer. It was me and another brother by the name of T and his brother Stem. They were my writing partners in the beginning. And my whole goal was to become the king of the insides and the outsides on the A-line, and beat out this guy by the name of Odd1, who was the big guy at the time. But I was aiming towards him to, outdo him, not only on the insides, but the outsides too. And so me and T, who lived in East New York too, and his brother Stem, we would write together. That's how my career, actual career started, from, with those guys, after I left Cheer 2 and started writing with those guys. T was my best friend first, and then his brother Stem became my best friend, because Stem just had a different kind of energy that T had.
Can I just jump in for just 1 minute, because I see questions, and you're speaking about these old school writers, and
right.
Most people don't know anything at all about what you're talking about.
Yeah,
right?
I'm sorry about that.
There's a few that do and a few that don't, but I would say you're blessing us with all this history from the 70s, and so for everybody that doesn't know, STIM, when he says STIM, it's STIM.
Yes.
Right?
STEM
And his brother T, TEE.
Yes.
And they used to put up 3YB a lot. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
we were all 3YB. T was 3YB because him and Cliff were good friends. T was the vice president of the 3YB, but he was the president of Brooklyn. And at the time, he was the most uprighter in Brooklyn. I mean, this guy had everything plastered. He's a definitely like, Hall of Famer. I mean, he was up crazy. And STEM one tragically died writing his name and being chased by a transit cop, and he lost his life running away from the transit cop.
So for those
This
that you don't know,
1975.
this is 1975.
Right.
A teenager by the name of Stim dies in a police chase. And
Yes.
that was a very big moment for the writing movement and the graffiti community in New York City because one of their own lost their life.
Yeah, it was tragic, and because we were all very young. I think he was 15. I was 14, and it really hurt us because up until then, no one died. I mean, people got chased, and you caught a beat down every now and then, but he was the first casualty I know of in the art world, and the thing about it was that everybody put up his name. His name was everywhere because he was the first one of us that passed away. And if you think about how many other writers passed away, and you had a good friend like that, you always, put up his name. But this guy was the first one.
And so, do you remember his real name?
Yes, yeah, his name was Charles Thomas.
So Charles Thomas, rest in peace. So
Yes,
tell us
definitely
a
rest
little
in
bit
peace.
about the Top Crew and the emergence of Top Crew.
Well, when STEM died, we felt the need to have our own crew in Brooklyn because 3YB was the 3-Yard Boys. It was more identifiable with Harlem and Manhattan than it was in Brooklyn. And myself and Hearst and Mickey, after STEM died, and STEM and T and Mickey and Hearst, they all grew up in the same Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood too. And from Bedford-Stuyvesant, T and STEM moved to East New York where we became friends. But they were friends with Mickey and Herb first. And Herb 99, by the way. And then after STEM died, we felt it was a need for us to have a crew that was strictly Brooklyn. And during that period of time, the style started changing up. We weren't doing those square, solid pieces anymore. We were doing pieces more with expression and being very efficient with our paint, because the majority of the time we were getting our paint because all our spots were burnt up. So we were basically getting our paint from the Strauss stores and from they had these like stores, these used furniture and refrigeration stores. So we would be breaking into those stores after they closed, and mostly what they had was the high heat silvers. And the Strauss stores had the high heat silvers and blacks and whites, the refrigerator whites and browns. So those were the colors that we were getting mostly. And one thing you notice about the high heat silvers and how they would expand, and you didn't have to use that much paint. And that was the start of the actual throw up, because we were being very efficient with our paint and the paint that we had. We mastered the silvers because we would just be going for the silvers, and cats started shortening up their names. That's how the throw up actually started, us shortening up our names. I had a short name already anyway. Everybody started shortening up their names. Hearst took on the name of OI, Mickey took on the name of T.O. And of course, N was the monster.
So let's stop right there for a moment. So
Okay.
you're telling me that paint, in particular the silver paint,
Yes.
and the way that that paint expanded when you painted on the train
Yes.
allowed you guys to paint faster, but and that you guys ended up shortening your names so that you could
Yes.
create more, take over more space for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, T was tilting his letters. You know, one, you know, the T would stand up, but then you would see the two E's tilt. So we were trying to take up more space. After a while, we would just squeeze in between people. Then after a while, we just started going over people. We would aim for whoever the king was online. And you have to remember, they was chasing us all over the fucking city. That's how we became all city. They was chasing us all over the city. You actually, well, you know, James, you know, the police was actually chasing us all over. When we go to one line, that line be hot. Now we have to go to another line. And then we figured out too that if we catch the floater spots above the lines, they wasn't buffing that. The buff had something to do with us too. The buff made it so that they kept buffing lines and they was just taking out generations of writers. Our wars were not against other writers. Our fight was against the MTA. We were painting to survive, and we was running from them because they was on us. From we hit a line one day, and then it'd be hot, so we have to go to another line to paint again. And then they was buffing people, and then we was really just catching clean trains. And then we figured out that if we hit the floater spots, they would buff below the line and we would still be up. So it was a lot of techniques involved with us getting up and painting too. And more time than I have here, of course, but I'm trying to describe to you the evolution of what was going on. During the throw up, you have to remember when we first started, nobody else was doing throw ups. There were a few crews that were affiliated with us doing throw ups, such as TC, BYB, NCB, but the majority of those guys wrote with us anyway, but they had their own crews. We were the top crew as far as the throw up revolution was concerned, because the throw up saved this game. Because it wasn't for the throw up, the MTA would have won the war against graffiti art.
So let me stop you right there for a moment.
No problem.
And so, you know, at the time that you guys were painting, you know, these throw ups and really trying to proliferate the trains, at the same time you had writers like Blade doing whole cars, Cliff doing whole cars, you had Lee doing whole cars, and I believe that the throw ups ended up being a contentious thing for many of those writers. Do you remember that? Do you remember there
Well,
being tension?
I don't remember tension. You know, a lot of guys did not. I guess didn't like us because we was getting up. Whenever you start getting up, you know, you catch jealousy and envy, and but you know, I never really felt that towards any of these guys at all, because we created our own lanes. We did our thing on the IRTs. We did our thing on the BMTs. We did our thing on the INDs. Those are the three major lines. They wasn't on all these lines like us. You have to remember that too. If you tell me they was rocking the twos and the fives, well, guess what? We took those too.
So, you know, I want to share this image on the screen if you could see it. it's a Lee car, and at the very end there's a throw up on the car, but it's crossed out. You know,
It's an OI.
right? It's an OI throw up,
Right,
and he painted on Lee's car,
right.
and then someone crossed them out. Why would OI paint on Lee's car?
Car looked like to me like it got buffed by the MTA.
So the
And
buff.
it became um kind of dead property to, like, you know what? MTA buffed it. Nobody can see really what's going on with it. I'm gonna get up. You heard?
So
But
so
then there was a
can you
lot of,
explain that a little bit? Can you explain,
well,
the
that
process of the
open,
buff?
whatever his presentation was, that little open space over there in that corner made a nice spot for a throw up, and really not disturbing his piece as much as it could have been disturbed, because everybody didn't jump all over on it. To a fact, uh, um, most of it to me looked like it got buffed by the MTA.
I mean, it got buffed. The windows got buffed,
There you
but
go.
the car,
I
which
mean,
the
the
train
car, the
car.
car is there. I mean, when something becomes to the point where it looks like the MTA buffed it, somebody gonna go over it. Somebody gonna go over it. And I
Okay.
figured he figured that he'll have enough respect just to catch the corners. Now it ain't in smack in the middle of his presentation.
Right. And how was that received? Because I remember reading, and I just saw a Blade quote today from, him explaining the throw up era, meaning you guys,
Yeah.
and he didn't quite appreciate you guys taking those little corners on his cars.
Well, I mean, first of all, we talking about something that happened like 40 years ago. But another thing is that each car was different, and if it looks like it was abandoned, old, or somebody could squeeze in there, somebody will. It's the same thing that goes on every day around the world somewhere else. Somebody do a nice big masterpiece and it looks faded, cat's gonna start jumping on it.
So did that bring up conflict, physical conflict, or crew conflict? Was
No,
there? No?
conflict, to me, conflict really wasn't jumping off to the 80s. We're talking about the 1970s right now. And we've never had no beefs with other crews like that. It's individual every now and then. I know Mickey didn't like Repel. I don't know. I don't remember nobody not liking Hearst. Mostly Mickey and N. There was a lot of animosity against N because he was getting up. They got cats faking N's, throwing them up on other people that they didn't like, and they were trying to blame it on N. Just like, childish, petty stuff like that people would be doing. To try to, because they wasn't man enough to tell somebody, or they were scared of whoever, but till they throw an N up on somebody's car. N got blamed for a lot of people's stuff. And another thing, cats tried to hang out with N, and he be out. And then they get busted, and then they try to say, well, you know what, this guy right here was snitching. Well, you have to remember, we're at 15 years old, what could we gain? Like, they wasn't giving us no paint, and they damn sure wasn't letting us go into any layups and not busting us, because they chased us every single opportunity they could, from one line to the next line. We became nomads.
So just for you to continue to expand, I think, learning all this information, hearing you talk about throw-ups, hearing you talk about your and your crew's perception of taking over space is really interesting to me, because you guys are carving out your own lane, trying to create a reputation for yourselves and
Right.
trying to dominate trains and be known and be recognized.
Yeah.
Can you just break down a little bit, like just a little bit more on the history of Top Crew? When was
Well,
it formed and who were the
sure.
main members?
The main members was me, Hurst, Mickey, and N. And anybody else try to want to squeeze up and say, well, you know what, they was there. They wasn't pure Top. They came from another crew somehow, and we absorbed them, and they became down with the crew. And Mickey was sitting here, he'll tell you the same thing. If Hurst was sitting here, he'll tell you the same thing. But those guys are not here, and that's why I'm here today.
And so those few members started the crew in 1974. Is that correct?
1974. 1974. And I can remember as clear as day, you know, before we started getting up, because like I tell you, we were all in 3YB at first. We were all of us who was in 3YB.
And for those of you that don't know, can you tell us a little bit about 3YB? What or who was 3YB?
Sure. The 3YB stands for the 3 Yard Boys. It was founded by Cliff 159. And the reason why we started writing 3YB is because T was at one point a partner with Cliff, and he was like the main leader of Brooklyn writers during those mid 70s years, like 74. He became the absolute leader of Brooklyn graffiti writers. We would meet every day on the bench at Atlantic Avenue, and it'd be on and popping from there. But like I said, you know, we grew up in the same East New York section of Brooklyn. Also, rest in peace to my man 001, who's also part of the early throw up movement. There were other cats that was part of the throw up movement, but you have to remember Top was the leaders of the throw up movement. When we started doing the 2-letter, you know, throw ups, there was nobody else out there doing them, but they wasn't doing them like we was doing them in silver, bro. We have to remember it was totally brand new, and then everybody started jumping on them.
Right, it created a new wave.
It
And can
created
you
a new wave in the game, bro. It was so exciting to see the throw up dominate. But you have to remember, like I said too, you see the MTA caused the rise of the throw up because they was buffing everything. They took out the IRTs and all those old writers from back in the days, and they was taking out whole cars and everything. They had a thing where they were just buffing lines. It was harder for them to buff the IND and the BMT lines because those were some of the newer trains. You heard
I love it.
Their buff did not quite get to the IND and the BMT. And then when they did, they was just really going through stuff with the blue line. They was catching just the blue line. And then we was going over the blue line and then catching the corners and things of that nature. Then they started a crazy buff on the INDs and the BMT lines too. And we'll run right back to the IRTs. So it was wherever they was moving at, we was moving away from. You know, we were actually running from them. They created a vandal squad just for the top crew.
So it really reminds me of the things that we started to experience as well in the late 80s when they took out all the trains and they cleaned the train lines, and we myself and the writers that were active at the time ended up having to do the same exact thing.
You're doing a lot of running.
Yeah.
A lot of running away from wherever it was hot at, and we was doing the same thing.
So I want to take us to 1977.
Yes.
1977 was a critical year for Brooklyn and for New York City, and you
Right.
were there.
Right smack in the middle of it.
and so can you share with our audience what was important and significant about 1977?
Well, you have to remember we've been doing throw up since like 74. And during 1977, we were getting tired. We were surely getting tired. For me personally, it was a hard year because my father had passed away that year. And I had all this built up energy and anger, and I needed to express myself artistically, you know, on the trains. You know, now we was hit trains, we was hitting streets too. And, you know, in central Brooklyn, we had all the on the lock, you know, top of New York, Brownsville, Bed-Stuy. By then, N was gone by 77. N was gone. You have to remember, he did 2 years of bombing that was unimaginable. unimaginable. I mean, this guy was such a workhorse and so dedicated to getting up. It was crazy. He was a really focused person.
So what I want to
Really
talk,
focused.
what I want you to
I know
share
you
with us
want to talk about
is
the blackout.
the blackout,
There you go. And
summer
I'm and
'77.
I'm getting to it. Give me a second. So eventually we would settle, because I told you we were nomads going from train lines to train lines. We would settle around Pennsylvania Avenue near Maxwell High School, Jefferson High School. We would settle in that area there, Glenmore Street. And basically, there was a group of, we started hanging out there to kind of meet up with Dyke. And Dyke had a brother by the name of Sid. But Sid would also hang out with a whole group of upstart writers. And when we started coming around, they would be hanging around us. That little upstart crew of writers would include Sid the Kid, Duro, who was writing Sono, and Dondi, who was writing Nako. There were some other guys by the name of Mandingo and Tide, who I thought were definitely going to be kind of like the heir apparents to us, because they were up more than those guys, and we had gave them a little more slack to hang out with us, because we were like 3 years older than these guys here. So, but we used to hit the trains. Mickey Two Top found out a way to hit the trains where we didn't have to go through the system. We would climb up the poles during these like abandoned blocks, and underneath the train, the train yard on Atlantic Avenue, there was like an abandoned rail line. And so like nobody would be there. So we found a way to climb up the poles and hit the J's and the M's that were laid up at night. And this was in the summer of 1977. So every night, you know, we'll rack up our paint, get out beer, and, you know, we would go up there and we would paint and, you know, drink our little beers. And Transit didn't know how the hell we were hitting the trains because we wasn't going through the systems. So they would be waiting at East New York and waiting down on the other end of Atlantic Avenue to see whether we would come up through past them to get to the layup, but we was coming up right in the middle underneath. And at one point, one night in July, really hot night, we were up there painting, and it was the night of the blackout, and we seen the whole city go out. And first it was Brownsville, and then it was East New York. Boom. And everybody just said, "Oh shit, blackout." And we all ran down. Of course, I wasn't so fast of a climber. You know, I've been tall all my life. And I remember Dondi waiting for me. You know, he was really clingy to me. And he was waiting for me to go down because I used to be upset that I had to go down. And why the fuck did I climb up here? Because I had big feet. And those guys were shorter and they had smaller feet. So those boats, they could really climb down and get up and down the pole fast. Me, it took a little longer. So when I got down, the whole East New York was in a panic. People running around talking about, "I'm going to get my money tonight. Oh, my baby going to have Pampers today." I mean, every story you want to hear about getting money in one night, we heard there that day during the blackout.
And so, did you get money?
Yes, we did get money, but we also, you have to remember, we were pretty tough as far as a band of, you know, like teenagers were concerned, you know, 16, 17, but we were known in the area as real, like tough kind of guys because, you know, we could rack up. I mean, we were professional rackers. Like, you know, we would never buy a beer. We're just rack beer. I mean, like it wasn't nothing because we go places and rack paint like it ain't nothing. And so when we would go to stores, there would be the first crew of guys that they would go in and just break the gate, the windows with sledgehammers or whatever, and they would be going in stores and they'd go get whatever first, and then we'll be the next crew of people that go in the stores and get stuff right after they come out. And so we were racking up stuff the whole night, but we had like a little abandoned house. We called our little clubhouse, and we would be bringing our stuff in there. And so we had this one guy named, and I'm talking about all of us, me, Mickey, Hurst, Dondi, who hung with me, and we would be, looting stuff and bringing it to the clubhouse. And so, every time I drop off my stuff, I go, yo, this guy named TAI was watching our stuff. I go, yo, TAI, everything all right, man? Like, you need anything, man? How we doing? Yo, y'all doing great. Go back out there. And I came back one time, kind of like short, because it would take us like an hour to come back and stuff like that. So one time I came back in 15 minutes. And I said, I ain't seen my shit there. I said, yo, man, where's my stuff? He goes, yo, James, I had to sell that shit, man, but I got some money for you. I said, man, you got money for me? You crazy little motherfucker? And he showed me the money he had. I took all the fucking money from him. Give me this money, and kicked his ass out. But when I did that, I had looked out, because the people that was buying from him was the people that was scared to go and do the looting. And so anyway, there was a long line. So, I said, fuck it, I'm not selling no more to nobody. But then I looked out the door again. The line was still down the block. And I said, what's going on? And people were talking about they needed stuff from us. So, we talking about old people, pregnant women, we broke into the pharmacy. We had all the food. We had food, boxes of Pampers. And we wound up giving all that stuff away to the community, and everybody agreed on it. We had stuff at the end that we had kept for ourselves, but we wound up giving all our stuff away. It's like a Robin Hood kind of thing. And it really cemented us in the community as being really community-minded graffiti writers. And after that day, everybody loved us, because they thought that we was racking up and just giving the stuff away. But we didn't start off like that. We started off racking up the stuff for us, but we wind up giving it all away.
Right. But I mean, at that time in Brooklyn, and especially, in East New York, I mean, this is a poor neighborhood. Things were tough.
Man, devastation was, you talking about poor. Nobody had a job. Like, nobody had a job, everybody was poor. And that was an opportunity for poor people to eventually take, because these same people that was there wasn't hiring nobody either.
No jobs.
None. Zippo. We had like 75% unemployment in East New York during that time. 75%. I mean, they talking about a recession. That was a straight up depression. And you would, if something happened, you call an ambulance, it would take them like 2 hours to get there. You had to wind up getting into a cab and going to the hospital if you was really sick.
Incredible. So the summer '77 was a pivotal moment in New York City's history, and obviously in your history, and in Brooklyn's history. It really, really changed. Things changed, and a lot of these neighborhoods with looting got wrecked, and stores didn't come back. But we're going to leave it there, and we're going to move on to another subject that I want you to talk about. And you've mentioned his name a few times, and that's Nako, aka Dondi. Can you hear me, James? I think we lost James's audio again, everybody. And so unfortunately, we're gonna stop right here, and we're gonna save this conversation, and in 2 minutes we'll jump right back on.